There's tournament blood spillage. There's blitzkrieg players to pillage, and it truly takes a village. Idiot. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, September 2022. For our feature story, we in the diplomacy hobby often use terminology borrowed from chess as we analyze the opening, the mid-game, and the endgame phases of our typical game. While much ink has been spilled in writing about openings and to some degree about strategic realignments occurring in the mid-game, relatively little hobby literature focuses on the diplomacy endgame. That ends now. Our panel discussion later in this broadcast will examine that topic through the lens of the top board of the recently completed Summer Classic virtual tournament and its fascinating three-way endgame tussle. We'll be joined by two of those participants in the game, as well as by one of the sideline reporters from DBN's coverage of that event. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. The 2022 European Face-to-Face Diplomacy Championship, the Euro DipCon, was just held in Switzerland, and host country player Christoph Borja was crowned as champ. Borja also has the distinction of holding 4 Swiss Diplomacy Championship titles, including last year's from 2021. Frenchman Vincent Roulet took second, which is 1 spot better than his finish last year, and Peter McNamara of Australia came in third. Peter, as you may all recall, was the winner of the very first DBN Invitational virtual tournament back in February 2021. So Peter himself is no stranger to viewers of this network. Congratulations to all three. It is great to see the European diplomacy circuit back up and running. By the time you will likely see this broadcast, SpireCon in the United Kingdom will either be happening or will have just happened. So we'll report on those results in the next Deadline episode. In the meantime, Davide Cleopatre has announced that the Italian National Diplomacy Championship will take place November 19th and 20th in Gambolo, just south of Milan in the region of Lombardy. 2 rounds will be played that Saturday, with the third being on Sunday. The event will actually take place in the historic Castello Lita, which is a castle in that area. A link to the Facebook page is provided below. Other upcoming face-to-face tournaments include the Weasel Mood in Chicago, September 24th and 25th, and the Liberty Cup in Philadelphia, October 7th through 9th. Link for all these events are provided below. Come on out. Face-to-face tournaments is da bomb. Here on Deadline, we'd like to report on how the game of diplomacy interacts with the wider world. In this case, the world of retail stores, proving that Reddit is in fact worth something. I noted recently when in a local GameStop that they had a diplomacy set for sale right next to the Pokemon plush toys and the Book of Boba Fett action figures. GameStop was a nice save there, Reddit. But this got me wondering, just where else can you find copies of our game for sale other than from Hasbro itself? Here's my answer. Imagine my surprise to discover that the North Carolina-based Harris Teeter grocery store chain offers diplomacy for sale on its website, as do fellow Kroger subsidiaries, Smith's Food and Drug, headquartered in Salt Lake, and Food for Less in the Chicago area. You can buy diplomacy on all those websites. The London Chess Center also has diplomacy on offer, which makes sense, as does the General Store in Spokane, Washington, which makes less sense. But the best part of these listings is how the game is described. It's a cooperative game. How cute. By the time you watch this broadcast, the fall 2022 edition of our hobby's flagship publication, Diplomacy World, will be about 2 weeks away from release. If you have thought about writing an article for the magazine, now would be a great time. Editor Doug Kent will accept submissions right up to the October 1st deadline. What kind of content would be appropriate? Almost anything having to do with the game of diplomacy. In the last one, issue 158, there were articles on negotiation theory, variants, tournament experiences, hobby history, and more. Just visit the website directly at diplomacyworld.net to peruse back issues for inspiration. And feel free to contact Doug directly at diplomacyworld@yahoo.com. This hobby will be even more fun if you decide to participate in ways other than just playing. And honestly, the way some of you play, maybe you should just write. Now, let's take a trip around the various websites and YouTube channels for the content providers we call our DBN media partners. Legendary Tactics just released a new diplomacy-themed video on their YouTube channel, which is about identifying 7 different types of play, from the defensive-minded turtler to the risk-taking aggressive blitzkrieg player. Another YouTube channel, DiploStrats, also recently released a new video. This one focused on an invitational diplomacy tournament on Backstabber, which is called Hidden Attack. Analysts Captain Meme and Ezio cover Season 5 of the Hidden Attack final in their usual thorough manner. Finally, the newest video from a third YouTuber, Florida Man, dives into the Turkish opening to Black Sea and Armenia, which is sometimes called the Crimean Crusher. You can find links to all of these videos below, or you can visit the media page of the North American Diplomacy Federation website, thenadf.org. Diplomacy content creation really took off during the pandemic, including this very own Diplomacy Broadcast Network. One consequence of the flowering of media production was a healthy competition between those content providers, not just in the quality of their programming, but over an actual game of extended headline diplomacy. The Media Wars competition kicked off with its first iteration in 2020, and then Media Wars 2 was played last year. Now, Media Wars 3, The Search for Sploak, has been played using the Blitz diplomacy format of 5-minute moves. Players from DiploStrats, Florida Man, DBN, The Diplomats, Legendary Tactics, Diplomacy Briefing, and Sploak himself faced off in an epic contest for bragging rights, not just over the board, but also over the content produced as a result of the game. I won't give away how the game turned out so that you can enjoy all of this content creation coming. The first 3 products from Sploak, from Florida Man, and from DiploStrats are out, so links to those videos can be found below, along with links to content from the first 2 Media Wars. The September 9th edition of the Hobby's weekly newsletter, Diplomacy Briefing, featured an outstanding article by Greg Matthews, who's known online as Village Idiot, regarding his experiences at the face-to-face tournament Cascadia in his home province of British Columbia. Coming primarily from online play, he recounts his initial reactions to the differences in the face-to-face format, including, for example, time management challenges and order writing snafus, as well as his proposed solutions to these issues for online players. His discussion of the meta and culture of the blended community of face-to-face and online is itself worth the price of admission. Plus, there is no price of admission. You can receive the briefing free in your email inbox every Friday. So if you are not already a subscriber, follow the link below to become one. All right, folks, the event of the diplomacy season will be here before you know it. The 2022 World DipCon, the World Championship of Face-to-Face Diplomacy, is coming up November 4th through 6th at the Carnage Tournament in Mount Snow, Vermont. Tournament director Dave Maletsky has also recruited a stellar cast of competitors already to vie for the title, but it's not too late to add your name to the list. Putting aside the competition itself, World DipCon is also the best opportunity of the year to meet new folks, to strengthen relationships with your people you're already acquainted with, and basically to have a blast. Our Diplomacy Broadcast Network will be present in force and will be broadcasting coverage live from the venue itself. How could you possibly miss this thing? If you still need convincing, press on the link below to the Neato Cool Whiz Bang promotional video recently released by the Clown Prince of Diplomacy, DBN's own Zachary Moore. And now it's time for a segment we call My Favorite Things. We'll interview a diplomacy player about that person's diplomacy journey and then talk about something of particular interest to that hobbyist, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we'll check in with longtime diplomacy hobbyist Brad Wilson about the diplomacy hobby of decades ago, as well as about his 36-year career in the field of sports journalism. Hello, Brad Wilson, and welcome to Deadline.
It's nice to be here.
You and I have known each other for a long time, but many of our viewers may not be familiar with your deep connection to the diplomacy hobby. So explain, if you would, how you got into the game originally.
Well, when I was in junior high, we discovered the Avalon Hill games like Panzer Leader and Panzer Blitz and Afrika Korps. And me and my friends in the neighborhood started to play them. And one game of Afrika Korps, I rolled the famous attacker eliminated role outside of Tobruk, playing the Germans. And the game was, of course, essentially over. And I was thinking to myself, these dice bother me. I mean, this is silly. So I happened to read in one of the Avalon Hill publications about a game that didn't have any dice. That was not decided by dice at all. And I thought, all right. So I got my mother to order it for my birthday. And we brought it in, diplomacy, obviously. And I was playing face-to-face diplomacy when I was 13 or 14. I remember one game with my friends. They had a house where you could keep the board set up. And we played till a game that went to 1925, the Austria-England draw. That was my, like, not the first game, but one of them. And I got my parents to play it, got my mother and father shouting at each other. They were in England, France against my Austria and my best friend's Turkey. And they were yelling at each other about, I could cause family hassle. I don't think that was the reason they got divorced, but maybe part of it.
I wonder if the English Channel has been a reason for divorce of the past.
Well, they were my father was France and my mother was England. And my father's argument was pitched to the line, well, if you help me, we can do these things. And my mother's argument was pitched to the line, well, I don't need your help to do these things. Why should I help you? She would have been a very good diplomacy player.
Apparently so, yeah.
More than that. But anyway, so eventually I was in high school and we were playing in high school. And I don't know whether my copy of the game or somebody's copy of the game had the old flyer that Avalon Hill used to put in saying, hey, play by mail. So I forget where that came about. So I got that and I got the information, and the first two scenes I signed up for were Dick Martin's Retaliation and Lee Kenner Sr., I'm sorry, scene, which I'm forgetting the name of. So that was 1979, I would say, when I started playing by mail, and I've been doing it ever since.
That's outstanding. I remember your own zine, which was called Vertigo, I believe.
Yes.
And you also had some face-to-face events that you ran, although I don't think I ever came to one, called Vertigo Games. Tell us a little bit about those two things.
Vertigo Games was a Labor Day convention, house convention at my mother's house in Paoli, Pennsylvania. There was one year where it transferred to my apartment in Chicago. But wherever it was just a festival of people playing whatever game they wanted to play. We didn't limit, there was diplomacy, there was civilization, there was Circus Maximus, there was whatever the cute little game of the time was where you roll dice, like there was a pirate game, which I'm forgetting the name of, where you rolled dice and moved on a velvet board. We played that to death. History of the World, 1830, on and on. I mean, there was virtually any game that we would play, and it attracted. There were, I would say, 10 or 15 regulars every year, and then there would be people from outside the area. People came from Canada, they came from the Midwest, they came from New England. That we had when we had it in Chicago, people came from the East to join the Midwest crowd. And it was just a lot of fun. I cooked breakfast for everybody, eggs, bacon. The late, great Robert Sachs used to eat about a pound of bacon and nothing else. He didn't want anything else. He just wanted the bacon. Um, um, John Boardman was there one year. Uh, in Paoli, we had a, but it was we drank a lot of beer and we played a lot of games, and we I invited non-diplomacy people of my friends from around Philadelphia, and they got to playing games and meeting other people, and it became an event that people really look forward to. Then we had them for close to 20 years, but then my mother sold the house, and that was the end of that kind of. The zine Vertigo was not a pretty sight. It was kind of ugly produced, and it was more often late than it was anything else, or really late, or extremely late. But I had a lot of fun doing it, and we talked about music and baseball and politics and hobby politics, and I ran all kinds of games, but never any other game that wasn't diplomacy or a variant. I never ran, by popular demand or Kingmaker or any of those other games because I didn't think I could. One of the things I really enjoyed doing in Vertigo was running Balkan Wars 5 and 6, which were my adaptations of Balkan Wars 3 and 4 that Fred Davis had adapted from Charlie Reinsel's Balkan Wars 1 and 2. Yes. I think 6 is a pretty good game.
I remember that variant fondly.
Yeah, we would play that at Vertigo games, and that people enjoyed that. It was quick. It gave you the diplomacy. It was a 6-player game. It gave you the diplomacy feel and everything, but it was fast, and because you could build in captured centers, there were no stalemate lines. So it particularly rewarded ruthless play, even though, which I'm not very good at myself, which is why I've never done real well at the game. I just designed it.
Well, that's fair. Well, this is a good segue into this question I want to ask you, which is a lot of our audience really wasn't around in the zine era and doesn't know what it was like to be in the hobby in those days. You and I remember this, you even longer than me, honestly, what it was like to be in an era of zines that had letter columns in it and really interesting hobby personalities with all the good and the bad. Give us a flavor of what it was like to be in the diplomacy hobby during those days.
Well, the best way I can put it is that you made real friends. And it can be hard for adults to make real friends once you leave college, once you leave high school. I made friends in the diplomacy hobby who are some of my very best friends right now that I've known 30, 40, 45 years, going back to the very beginning. There are people that we do all kinds of other things with. If we haven't played diplomacy with them in 15 years or 20 years, that doesn't matter. We're real friends. And that's what came out of, that was to me, the single most important thing of the diplomacy hobby was meeting people who became part of your life and that you shared life events with and you traveled with and you go to dinner with and hang out together, that kind of thing. So that was very important. But it was always neat with the letter columns to see people's opinions, what people were interested in. I was always fascinated by the idea that there's people from Alaska getting my zine in Canada and Belgium and Germany, and what they were like overseas and what they, and in other parts of the country. And then, of course, as you know, we used to, you wanted to meet what these people looked like. You wanted to put the face to the name, as it was said at the time. You wanted to go to a face-to-face gathering so you could see what a Bob Olson looked like, or a Bob Osuch looked like, or a Kathy Caruso looked like. You wanted to see what they looked like. So there were events we went to. I mean, you would call the host and tell them you're coming most of the time, and you would show up 900 miles later, and there you were in Wisconsin or North Carolina or upstate New York or wherever you were going. So there was a massive amount of interchange of friendship and personality that I wouldn't say had nothing to do with the game, but the game kind of receded a little bit behind all of the opportunities that you had to get to know people better.
And yet the game itself has had staying power since, obviously, 1959. Why do you think that is? What about the game keeps it going?
Well, I think several things about the game keep it going, and why I still play it, in a couple of the zines that are left. I think the no dice thing is still very attractive. I think it's a balanced game. You can play diplomacy. You could play 7 times, play a different country. You can play the same country 7 times and have a totally different game, different alliances, different setups, different works. I think that's attractive of the game. It's never the same thing all over again. Like I'm currently playing a game where the rest of the world has been absolutely wiped out by an Austrian, German, Russian 3-way alliance, which I never saw coming. I'm France. I'm the last one left. And I never saw that coming. I never saw that alliance work so well. Normally it breaks down over, one reason or another, but it hasn't broken down yet before it blows me into the smithereens. So that's something I've never seen in 40 years of playing, is something like that. So I think that's part of it. I think the personal interaction is big. I think it's not a game like Dungeons and Dragons where you sit there and the dungeon master is having all the fun while you're sitting there going, yeah, okay, right, yeah. You're actually part of what's happening. And it's a simple game to learn. Now the subtleties are not simple, but it is a simple game to learn the first time. And it can be played 15, 20, minutes of instruction, maybe half an hour, and bang, you're playing. I get frustrated with games where it takes longer to learn the rules than play the game.
Yes.
And diplomacy is not like that. I think, but the personal interaction, and I think the ability to have a totally different experience every time you play, that's why I think it has the appeal.
What's your favorite country to play and why?
A long time ago, when somebody did a tactical guide, I wrote a column of how to play Germany. I would still say Germany. I like it because you can have an Eastern approach, you can have a Western approach, you can buddy up with virtually any country on the board and make a alliance that can work. But it's also hard work playing Germany. You can't just be England, or to a lesser extent Turkey. You can kind of sit around for a while and choose what side they're on. You can't do that as Germany. Germany, you have to be working the whole time because you are surrounded directly by 4 other powers, and Italy can be there in one move, as Kathy Caruso made famous when she was Kathy Byrne at the time with the Bern opening, which is where suddenly Italy sitting in Munich, supported there by France, and after fall 1901, and the whole world opens up. The whole part of Central Europe opens up in a way that you wouldn't have thought about it. But I would still say Germany because of the way that you can work with all the other countries, and also it's easy to win as Germany because there's a lot of centers within real close grasp of your armies in your homeland. I mean, you have Scandinavia, you have the Low Countries, you have the French centers, the Austrian centers, Warsaw. It's real easy to get up into the numbers you need to win.
That is an interesting take on Germany in relation to the current meta in the hobby, which is a little bit Germany is tough. And I agree with what you're saying, but it just goes to show you how things change over time within the diplomacy hobby.
Well, where was it? I believe it was the Netherlands, where over a long period of time, the country that won the most games was Italy. Huh?
It happens. Yeah, I know it does. It happens.
But the game developed differently there. That's what I'm saying. So if you went to the Netherlands to play in a face-to-face convention, and you draw Italy, and people are looking at you like, ooh, and it's Italy, because in this country, I'm sure Italy, if you totaled up American stats, Italy or Austria has to be last in number of wins.
You would be surprised, Brad, in the last several years how much that has changed around.
Oh, really?
And now Turkey is considered to be the sick man of Europe, so to speak.
Well, it certainly was at the time. Okay,
it's interesting. It's very interesting.
There's no country I don't like playing. The only country I dislike playing is Russia.
Well, let's step back just a minute and talk about the hobby as a whole. Back in the 80s, when I started playing, and a little bit into the 90s, and of course this goes further back than that, there have always been what I would consider to be sort of factions and feuds, in so many words, sometimes occurred in the hobby, certainly controversies. Is there anything and that honestly is a little bit less true now, but do you think there's something about the game itself that can lead to this kind of controversy among hobbyists?
Oh yeah, I think so, because you have everybody has their own little, I don't want to say house rules, but has their own little things going on around games. I think diplomacy can attract people who are well-spoken and but also can be contentious and devious, and I think sometimes the contentiousness and deviousness can spill over into the personal interactions. Yeah, and you know what's really funny? If you look back at it, now it would be very different, I'm sure. But if you look back at the 80s and 90s, real world politics weren't the cause of most of the, I mean, I'm not even sure I knew some of the people's politics. And
Yeah.
if they did, we had reasonable political discussions. At the time, Vertigo was a generally a right wing libertarian ish publication, which if I did it now, since my politics have changed 180 degrees, it would be different. But I don't remember not liking someone because I didn't agree with their politics.
Right.
Hobby politics were different. But I just think it was a way to express yourself with the press and the letters and things like that. And people took exception to that. And then when you did meet face to face, let's face it, some people aren't going to like each other. So if you're at a face to face gathering, I have been at more than one of those where the host threw somebody out and told them that don't come back. I was tempted at Vertigo Games to do that a couple of times, but I never did because my theory was it was publicly announced in the hobby. It was an open invitation, so you can come.
Understood.
Although I had a female guest once who complained that we had a dog and a cat and she was allergic to them. The reason I was staying at the house was to take care of the dog and the cat while my sister and my mother were on vacation. So one of my friends said to me, maybe you should put her in the cage and let the dog and the cat out. So that sort of thing could then carry over into a letter column, into a game, into an accusation of cross gaming, as we used to say at the time, where, because you attack me in game A, I attack you in game B. Yeah. That sort of thing. So, yeah, I do think there was something to the game that did create some of the bad feelings and very strong personalities, and people gravitated to very strong personalities. I mean, whether you like Kathy Byrne or didn't like her, Kathy has a very, very powerful personality. So I think that was part of it too. The game does not attract too many Milquetoasts, I don't think.
That's fair. Well, let's talk about your career outside of diplomacy. That's what we like to do on this segment of the show. So you have had a career in sports journalism. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've been a sports writer for 36 years. There was one period in the mid 90s where I was the head editor of a local weekly newspaper, but I was also still writing sports. So I kind of count that as 17 months of writing sports too, which I was doing a lot of. So I'm extraordinarily fortunate because, as I'm sure everybody knows, the number of newspaper jobs in America that existed in 1986 that don't exist now is enormous. So many of my friends have been laid off or had to change professions or, just haven't been able to find good work. And I've been very, very lucky that for 36 years that I've been able to stay in the profession. I've done just about everything there is to do. I've been an NFL writer. I've covered Major League Baseball. I've covered international soccer. I've covered college football. I've covered other college sports. But my favorite thing to do is what I do now, which is covering high school sports in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania and northwestern New Jersey. That's my favorite thing to do. And I love doing the high school sports. I think you're telling kids stories. And that's the best part of it. I would trade 10 NFL games to do one high school game.
Are there particular high school sports that you enjoy covering the most?
Yeah, I've made something of a reputation as a wrestling writer. And when I say wrestling, I don't mean WCW wrestling. I mean amateur, high school, college, Olympic wrestling. Our area that I work in is very strong in that sport. Very, very strong in wrestling. Wins national championships. We cover Lehigh Wrestling, which is one of the most distinguished college programs in the country. A perennial top 10, top 15 contender. So wrestling has become a very I've won, I don't want to boast here, but I've won national awards in wrestling. I've been the National Wrestling Writer of the Year twice. My name's in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame when I won their top award a couple of years ago, which frankly floored me. I was surprised by that. Most of the journalism awards I've won from New Jersey and Pennsylvania press associations have been about wrestling, and I enjoy the fact that it's I like the head-to-head stuff. I like the winner or loser stuff. I like the physicality of the sport. And lately, in our area, the girls' version of the sport has been catching up. There's more and more girls wrestling, which has been a challenge, something different. But I think that's very positive too. The other things, the other two things that I kind of enjoy doing the most, track and field, which I've done for on and off for years, and I really enjoy track. And I don't do it so much anymore, but I love covering baseball. But
Fair.
I don't do that anymore. But I did for a long time.
Is there any particular story or event or athlete or somebody that really stands out to you as somebody that you've covered over the years?
Well, I would answer that by saying there was a couple of events that did. Lafayette and Lehigh have played football against each other as a college more than any other two schools in the country. They played like 157 times or something along those lines.
Wow.
Well, for the 150th game, they wanted to do something special. This was a few years ago, 2013, 2014. I mean, the exact year I'm not remembering, but it's in that range. So they moved it to Yankee Stadium. And they thought, we'll sell, generally speaking, the game in the Lehigh Valley at one of the colleges would sell about 15,000 tickets. At the college, they figured they'd move it to Yankee Stadium. Maybe they sell 20, 25,000 tickets. The first day you could buy tickets, 27,000 tickets were sold.
Wow.
By the game sold out. The Yankees kept opening sections and the people kept buying the tickets. So I was the Lafayette beat writer at the time of college football, which I should mention, that's the other thing I really love is college football. Pro football, not so much, but college I love. So anyway, so we get to Yankee Stadium and there's 50,000 people there to watch Lehigh and Lafayette play football. And I was just mind boggled by the whole thing of the whole experience. And then Lafayette wins the game with a quarterback who hadn't played all year or most of the year before because he'd walked away from the game because for various reasons. But he'd walked away. He had to be talked into coming back to the game, and he wasn't supposed to play in the game until the Wednesday before the game because when the other quarterback got hurt in practice. So I'm sitting next to Ralph Russo, who's the AP's national college football writer, a man whose copy I've read for years, and I have the utmost respect for. He's one of the best sports writers in America. And he's asking me questions. Like he's pointing, he says, that's the kid who hasn't played? Oh, I said, yeah, that's him. And so what a great story. The kid as a senior wins this memorable game, wins. They win the league championship. They go to the playoffs. We won't talk about what happened in the playoffs, but they won that game, and it was such a great story. Everybody was so positive, and it was fun to be in New York the day before and the night after because you went to a bar or restaurant. There were people with Lehigh stuff, Lafayette stuff. I knew a lot of them. It was fun. That was overall. I've done a lot of things, but that would be right up there as the best event.
I can understand that. Let's end on a philosophical note, Brad. Are there lessons from the world of sports that you think we could take into our own personal lives? Yes,
I think there are a couple. I think that one of them is that you can make yourself a better person if you try. I've seen athletes improve at levels that are amazing, from where they start through hard work, dedication, and being prepared and working hard. I think that's a lesson anybody could learn. Second, I think sportsmanship, learning how to lose. Not everything in life is going to go your way. So learning how to accept that and to deal with that is an important thing. And third, I think the world of sports is a very diverse world, has a lot of people in it, and I think it's a great way to look at the broader world out there through dealing with other athletes from different backgrounds. This is obviously true of international competition, but it's national competition too. You meet kids from, we're from the Northeast, which has a certain way of living, and I'm meeting kids from rural Idaho, Texas. You can learn a whole lot. So I think those are three things that you could take from sports into your regular life and make it better.
Sounds totally right to me. How about the world of diplomacy? Do you think there are lessons we can learn from that world that we could take into our personal lives?
I think, yeah, I would agree with that too. I think one of the big things you can take away is how to deal with other people and work with other people. This is one of the most consistent faults that are noted in a lot of American business letters and things where you read about things that people don't do well is work as a team and communicate as a team and work with other people. Well, that sounds like how to win a diplomacy game to me, and that the same lesson can apply in your office, in your church, in your youth group, in your whatever you're doing in real life, so to speak. I think that's one, and also I think persistence. I mean, there's one game I've been following just as a fan in the Andy Lachette scene where Paul Rauterberg had a 1 cent of Russia that I think is now up to 3 in 1923 or something like that. Stick with it. You never know what'll happen. I think that's a good lesson for life too.
Are you saying that Andy Lachette's zine Cheesecake is still going after all these years?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Good gracious!
I have a copy of it right here.
I believe I played in that zine in the mid '80s or mid to late '80s.
Well, he hasn't changed a bit. He's Andy Lachette. I can say that I've been to Andy's house, and again, this is where we're talking about diplomacy. I've been to his house and helped clean him out in the poker game. Him and the wonderful Russ Rusnak.
Oh my!
Anyway, but yeah, he's still going strong. He's just had issue 400.
That's outstanding, Brad. I really appreciate you being on the show, and it is great to catch up with you after all this time.
I thoroughly enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun.
All right, see you, man.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
And now for our panel discussion. We worked so hard to get to the end game of a diplomacy match. We don't get eliminated early. We don't get stabbed by our ally in the mid game. We make the strategic choices the right way after gaining a few early centers in the early part of the game. So yay, end game. But do we know what to do when we get there? Or are we like the dog chasing the car? We catch that in-game automobile and then what? Let's turn to a panel of hobbyists who participated in different ways in an interesting in-game scenario from the top board of the VWDC Summer Classic, which was held back in late July. We have Katie Gray from New Mexico, who topped the board. We have Parisian Nicolas Taillet, who did not. And we have Robert Schuppe from Germany, who provided sideline reporting during the coverage of that final right here on the Diplomacy Broadcast Network. Welcome, one and all, to Deadline. Katie, let's start with you. Give us a brief history of you and the diplomacy hobby.
I started playing diplomacy on web diplomacy about, I think, 4 years ago. And all extended Deadline games, almost always with the classic map. And then I sort of made the transition into the virtual space, on Discord servers a year and a half ago or so. And I've been to 2 face-to-face tournaments. Those were a lot of fun. Quick plug, if there's a face-to-face tournament near you that you can attend, I highly recommend it. It's very fun. Yeah. That's it.
No, that's good. Robert, how about you?
So I very briefly got into the game about 7-ish years ago. I heard about the game from a friend who I was playing other board games with and played a few games online and one very weird face-to-face game where we didn't have any Italy. And I somehow didn't catch the bug back then. I don't know what was different, but it didn't really hook me. And then in the beginning of 2021, when we were all locked down again, I was thinking poker, chess, all these kind of games have a big renaissance online because of COVID. What's about this diplomacy thing? I used to play a little bit, and I went on YouTube and was stunned to see that many great videos. I think I first discovered Diplostrats and then DBN and started watching again. And I remembered back when I was playing first, there were like 5 videos with some guy with a shaky handycam showing the standard openings on the board, and that was about it. So I was really amazed to see what had grown since then, and got addicted to watching these videos, and at some point thought I should start playing again. Got sucked into playing virtual quite a bit over the last year, and lately had my first face-to-face experience with a tournament, which was great.
Yes, and it's great when your first face-to-face experience is that you win the tournament, Robert. That's
makes it better. I agree.
All right, Nicola, how did you get into the game?
Well, for me, it's been a long story, but with long pauses. So the first game I ever played was 10 years ago with a few friends. and they all hated it. Like they all hated the experience. 7 hours, of playing the game, and I loved it, but I never found anybody else to play it. So like 4 years ago or something, I played a bit of Extended Deadline, but it wasn't really for me. Waiting months sometimes for a game to finish. That was a bit like frustrating. And same as Robert, with COVID, I discovered like DBN, and then I was hooked with the VDL, and it was a lot of fun discovering the game and getting better with Robert, and then getting destroyed by Katie. So that was a lot of fun.
Yes, you really have been through the ringer. I think we can all agree with that. Let's stay with you, Nicolas. The viewers on DBN will have seen you before on top board. So you came into this game that we're going to talk about here, the Summer Classic top board, reasonably experienced for games of that caliber. How do you feel the in-game situation in that game compared to others that you have either observed, played in, or commentated on for DBN?
Well, I've played 3 top boards since I've started Virtual Face to Face. So the first one was VDL, then there was DBNI, and finally the Summer Classic. And I think the main difference, there were 2 main differences, I think, from my point of view. The first one is that you had a true rookie with Josh playing on that board. And that has to factor in. And then you had also the fact that I got completely obliterated by Katie, Farron, and Josh the game just before the top board. So of course that played a role in where I didn't want to be. And I think the 2 factors weighed in a lot in my decision of which country to play. And retrospectively, maybe it was a bad choice, but I knew I couldn't work with Josh as well as Katie could work with Josh, because and the same was for Russ. That's why I didn't want to play Italy, and he took Italy. He thought it was a really great guess, but like we are speaking to the brain of people, and Katie does that, but she's speaking to the heart of people too. So I think that's where we are clearly inferior to her. So like this aspect was completely different, in my opinion, from other boards like that we had. And that made it fun also, like the choice of country at the beginning. It was much more strategic than it was ever the case before for me. So that added another dimension, and it's another lesson and didn't really follow. It's don't play with fear, and I played with fear of being attacked by these 3 people, and that didn't really work out for me.
As they say in Dune, fear is the mind killer. Don't let fear. Katie, you also came into this game, and it was not your first in-game rodeo either. So what did you think about it?
Yeah, well, sticking with just the top board experience, this was my second top board game, and my first was the DBNI game that Nico was in too, and I went into that game thinking that it was going to be cutthroat, balance of power, all these sharks like swimming around, and everyone grabbing what they can, and that's how I played basically the entire game. And it ended with sort of a Care Bear Alliance type thing where people were like, oh, this person was nicer to me, so we want him to win. And I was like, wait, that's usually me. What am I doing? So I basically just didn't play how I normally played, and it didn't work out for me. And so going into this top board, I was like, you know what, I should obviously be playing the way that I like to play and that I'm comfortable playing, and that usually works better for me. Country power selection was part of that. I had a lot of the same thoughts as Nicola. I knew that there were people I could work with better and worse with on the board, and just based on how power selections usually go, I figured that the people who were picking last were going to be Austria-Turkey, and I kind of just thought Russia would give me a lot of options. In terms of the end game, Russia might not have been the best pick because Russia is fairly vulnerable, I think, or my position was certainly very vulnerable. But, going into that game, and then even through the end game, even as I was stressing out throughout the entire mid game and even in the end game, I was just thinking, like, I have to rely on the way that I normally play, and have to rely on, making people not want to attack me. And Nicola is really fun to work with throughout the game. I think it's a really funny dynamic. Like I always want to do what he wants, and I always know I'm like, this is going to work out well for him, and it's not going to work out well for me. So he can say whatever he wants about talking to people's hearts, but like I go against my instincts all the time, and I'm like, okay, I'll do this thing that Nicola wants me to do. I'll do part of it. And I think that played all the way into the Endgame too, like up until probably the last two years. A lot of that dynamic was going on, and I think that was actually really fun. So I was glad that, it worked out, but it was stressful. I don't know. It was a fun game. I think Josh being newer had some impact on it. I think, every game is different because of the players who play each country. And I think that game had a really interesting end game dynamic, especially since there were 3 people who were sort of fighting for it at the end. And I think a lot of times it's usually 1 or 2 people, 2 people usually who have a chance at it. And with 3 people, I think that was kind of fun.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about that in this panel discussion, was that I had the same reaction. Robert, the jockeying at the end of a timed final board like this, it was fascinating for us viewers. How about you being on the sideline, listening to the negotiations as the sideline reporter?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to listen in. Really, really intense negotiations, especially towards the end. Even though that differed depending on who you were listening into. Like these 2 co-panelists of mine, they were both still in the running for the win, and Jason Mastbaum was sort of the third one. They were really, I think you could hear that they were under pressure and they were trying hard, and especially negotiations between these players who were still in the hunt were very, very intense. Whereas some players who had accepted towards the end game already that they would not win this game, like Josh, for example, or Farron, were a bit more a mix of, I would think, relaxed and probably a little bit frustrated by the game, but certainly less stressed out. But one thing that was very fascinating for me to hear was that I was listening into some conversations that were, people were talking about stuff I would not have expected them to talk about on a top board, because it doesn't make that much sense on the top board. Like, for example, hey, we're going to do an alliance and we are never going to stab each other. Or, hey, how about we take a draw right now? It was like 1908 or 1909. Nicola was at 8. Katie and Jason were both at 7. And Nicola and Jason were talking about taking a draw. To be honest, I didn't really buy it. I think none of them really thought that the other was serious about this. But still, they talked about it for 2 or 3 minutes, which was fascinating to me. And I think what it was, at least that's my interpretation, that sometimes you gotta, there's sort of a code of courtesy how to manage relationships in the game of diplomacy. And sometimes you do the same things on a top board that you would do in a quote unquote normal game. Like, hey, telling your ally, I will never stab you, or hey, we should talk about a draw. I mean, you're on top right now. Even though it's clear to probably both sides that none of the 2 is really honest about it. And that was fascinating to me. It was like a good example for, we're not just talking to each other to exchange information, but also just like to nurture our relationships. And that was very interesting to listen into.
Even relationships that might matter beyond that particular game.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, let me follow up, Robert. Do you think that this in-game play that you observed was influenced by the event format, or the fact that it was a virtual face-to-face tournament, or both?
Yeah, for sure. I think Nicola wanted to quickly jump into that with a point, maybe.
Yeah, just very quickly, like what you mentioned, I think it's a very interesting point, actually. But the truth is, it's also strategic. Like, in my thinking, the idea was I wanted to force Jason's hand and Katie's hand basically by proposing these draws, and I wanted to know which one I couldn't trust, and I trusted the wrong one. So yeah, that's what happened.
Nice, interesting to hear. Yeah, going back to the question, I think it was very much influenced by the tournament format. It was a timed round or a year limited round. It was fixed that the game would end in 19 or after 1910, and I think that massively factored into the game. I think players made moves earlier than they would have in an untimed round. I think Jason stabbed in spring of 1909. He was France, and Nicola was Germany. And it felt to me like he was making a move because he thought he was running out of time. He was the one who had picked first, so he needed to surpass everybody else on the board. If he had gone for some sort of a shared board hop, he would always lose the tiebreaker. And I think he just felt like he had to make the move then. Whereas I could very well see that he would wait for longer, maybe try to take a few centers in the mat rather than going for Germany with really what was not a great stab. He got something off of it, but it was not a huge stab. And I think that played a big role for him. And likewise, I'm not sure how Nicolas would play if this was not timed, because he has mentioned it quickly. We've played a lot and we've discussed games a lot. I don't know Nicolas Taillet as somebody who's giving up easily, and Nicolas starting to throw dots to Katie when he was on 7 centers still, I think, or so. I don't think we would have seen that if it had been an untimed round, because there would have been a way back certainly from that German position if he had more time. And so my impression was that it also played around a bit of a factor there, but obviously that is talking about somebody who's present here, so I might be completely wrong about that. But yeah. Short answer, it definitely played a big role, I think.
Katie, does this game play out differently under a different format, without the time limit, without the specifics of the event format?
Yeah, I think Robert's exactly correct. I think that the time limit played a huge factor. I mean, we mentioned this before, but we had Josh in Austria and Farron in Turkey, and at that point, they both, basically impossible to top the board in the last 2 years. And so I think it's important in those situations to try to understand what people's sort of backup motivation is, because once you're at a point where you can't top the board, you can't win, you still have to play for something. I mean, most people aren't just going to go through robotic motions and do nothing, because there's still something to be gotten out of the game. And, Josh wanted to have fun. He had this funny moment where he was like making me and Jason pitch to each other about try to pitch to him who he should help win the game. I think Farron wanted to sort of come through for an alliance member. I think Russ in Italy also towards the end game was also in a point where he couldn't top the board. And I think his only motivation near the end was that I don't win. So, people just have different goals at the end of the game, if they're in a position where they can't necessarily top. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that's true even in an untimed in-game situation. There are still people that may not be in the quote running end quote, but you've got to figure out what their motivations are. That's certainly the motivations change with a time limit.
Yeah, I think they become it becomes more clear and more obvious when people are not going to be able to win if there's a time limit. I mean, Farron's position, well, I guess she had fleets. Maybe it wasn't going to expand that quickly, but my position was crumbling. I mean, if Nicola hadn't thrown at the end, I don't think I could have taken enough from Farron to win, and Josh wasn't going to hand them to me. So, I think that game works out very differently if it's not timed, and I don't think I'd top it for a variety of reasons.
Of course, the game up to that point would also have been different, perhaps, if it was not in time. So I know we're talking about a counterfactual here, but Nicola, let me go to you for a minute. So we just talked about how one of the things about the end game is what are people's motivations vis-a-vis the tournament format rules. How important do you think the actual tactics of diplomacy are in an end game situation like this?
I think Katie is right saying that motivations are going to be the drivers, like the main driver of what's happening. Tactics for me are more important defensively. Like what's important is to defend yourself with tactics. If you bet on tactics to attack, you're doomed to fail. You need somebody else to attack. So you're going to need this ally with a different motivation. So I think Katie and Robert pretty much nailed it with their comments. It's find the people with a different motivation. And the tactics are here merely to help you have this position, making you a player at the end. For me, that's more how I would put it. And to come back to the previous topic, basically, I think Katie understood that those motivations better than Jason did, and that's why she won, basically. And I think Katie downplays herself a lot. So I don't think she is this poor tactician that she wants us to think she is. But mainly she understood my motivations better than Jason. And that's more important than tactics on the board, because you could argue that the tactics were not important at all in the end. Like, enter into Sweden, enter into Denmark, enter into Berlin. It's not very complicated, right? But just understanding that it was clear that she would win if she would do that, that's what diplomacy is about. And yeah, it's
Can
more
I
important than tactics. Yeah.
Can I say one thing to that, David? There was this moment, I think it was the fall of 09, where Farron was encouraging me so hard to take Sweden. It was after Jason had stabbed you, but I think before you had fully decided to throw, or at least from my position, you were talking to me about it, but I wasn't like sure that you were actually on board yet. And I was just hoping that, Jason would continue to try to win, which I assumed he would, because why wouldn't he? Because we're all trying to win. And it was nice for me that he had to go through you to do it, because I was thinking, if Jason is continuing to attack you, and I am not, then you're more likely to want me to win. And Farron had really good strategic reasons why I needed a build and why I should be in Sweden. And I was like, I think, like, I don't want to take something that would otherwise be given to me. And I thought that if I took Sweden that year and tried to make an argument to you for why I needed it, then I felt like I'd be in more of a position where you were like, well, now both people are attacking me and I don't really care, and you're just going to like turtle up or something. So I don't know if that was true or not, but definitely, when the timer's ticking down at the end of the game, like those kinds of sort of diplomatic relationships, or trying to understand the relationships that other people have, I think they're still, just as important as trying to get an alliance started and keep it going. I don't know what you would have done if I had taken it then, but
I would have thrown to you still, because
okay.
Jason was the first to attack me, but I think it was the right play, because I would have less unit to hold on Jason. So it was potentially one more dot or two more dots for Jason in the end. So I think that was the right choice. And on that, actually, and I think it's, tell me if I speak too much, so and we can go to the next question. But I think the strategy here and understanding the motivation is really key here, and Katie understood that. My pitch was basically, I'm on 8 dots, your goal is to take 9 dots to beat me, and I'm not going to do anything to get the 9 dots. If you get to 9 dots, you win. And Jason had the possibility to do that through Italy, and Katie through Turkey. And so I thought, if someone wants to go through me, okay, fine, but he or she is not going to win. And Katie understood that fully, and I don't think Jason understood that fully. And she won. So congrats to her.
Well, that's absolutely congrats to Katie, and it was a lot of fun to watch. And I know Robert enjoyed being a commentator in that game. Let's move away from the Summer Classic just a minute and talk about end games a little more broadly. Nicola, one scenario in which tactics are really key at the end game is when you've got someone pushing for a solo and trying to get that 18th dot. What considerations do you think are most important in that end game scenario?
I think you have two considerations. The first is know where the stalemate lines are. So know your stalemate line, rush to the closest stalemate line, and make yourself useful. And also the second consideration that I always mention, and I know it's not going to help my reputation, but it's be in a position to throw the game. Because you have enough people, they say, go to the stalemate line, and they take advantage of this, and they take 3 dots in your back, and they say, well, anyway, you're going to stop the solo, right? Because you're here. So for me, the tactics here is more, how do I throw if you screw me? And, yeah, that's part of the of defending against the solo, I think. Like you're rushing to the stalemate line and then being ready to have people pay for what they do to you.
That is a traditional answer to the question, and an answer which some people fight you on that and say that's not appropriate. I mean, I think that's has been a healthy debate in the hobby forever about the extent to which you should be either willing to or actually go through with a throw as opposed to staying on the line.
But if you throw too much, your throw threats are not credible, right? But if
Yes.
you never throw, then it's not credible either. And I think it's useful to make that threats once in a while. And if you can follow through with it, I think it's even better. Like Karthik did it, I did it. Like I'm expecting for other people to do it, and I think it just keeps people aware that you can do it if need be.
Oh yeah. Katie, let me ask you another question about in-game situations. Do you think it is possible for a strong alliance to last deep into the end game? We talked a little bit earlier, Robert brought up a little bit earlier, sort of what he thought was not a very serious suggestion about a strong alliance at the end of a time to top board end game. But what about a regular sort of untimed end game? Is it possible to have
Absolutely.
a long, strong alliance? Under what
Absolutely.
circumstances?
Alliances are always possible. That's my motto. I think they're fairly easy to keep together in sort of the early rounds of a tournament because you don't want a reputation as a stabber, maybe, or maybe you just don't want a huge score. You don't want a target on your back. In those kinds of games, I think that strong alliances do tend to stick together, and you have a lot more to lose by stabbing an ally, even if you're going to get centers out of it. So there's not really an incentive to do that. People play for different reasons, and a lot of people, oftentimes myself included, play to negotiate and have fun and form these sort of working relationships. And I think that in sort of one-off games, that's very common too. People don't see the need to stab. I mean, maybe if there's a solo, people will go farther, but in a lot of games, solos just aren't possible. And if you know that, and you know that you're not going to get much from stabbing your ally, then that's a reason that it could last. I have one anecdote from Extended Deadline, which is perhaps not quite as relevant to this community, but it was a really fun game for me. I was playing Turkey, and the French player and I hit it off. We formed a really great friendship, and in the mid game started to work together a lot. And this was in a tournament where you played every country once, and you never played the same player again, and you only got a point for soloing. And myself and the French player, we did a two-way draw. And I think we both had options to stab and to take the solo. The tournament director was a little annoyed. I think a lot of other players in the tournament were really annoyed because it went against the spirit of the tournament. But it just kind of got to the point where, I mean, it's Extended Deadline. We were playing for probably 4 months or something. We were friends and we were having a good time. We were having a lot of fun, and we just decided that it was more important to us than a point in a tournament. I'm not saying that that's common, and I don't think that would happen in a virtual or face-to-face game because they're just quicker games and stuff. But there are always scenarios where an alliance can sort of win. It tends to not be easy because everyone else on the board wants you to break up. And so everyone's going to be saying things to push those buttons. But if you have people, 2 or 3 or however many people who are willing to just stick to their word and do what they decided to do, I mean, it can always happen.
This is another debate that's been going on since the very beginning of the diplomacy hobby. It was a tradition way back when people wanted to do a 17-17 that they would set the situation up, get the 17-17, and then convoy an army from St. Pete to Syria or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a thing that people did. And then other people would say, you're screwing around with my game. And they're like, it's my game too. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my 17-17.
Yeah.
Robert, let me ask you a question. Are there particular centers or other spots on the board that players should really focus on when they're in the end game or about to enter the end game as being particularly important objectives? And I really want this to be a point for people who are learning the game. What should they be looking for going into an end game scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Nicolas earlier mentioned already the major stalemate lines. They are obviously very important for many late game situations, stopping a solo or just stopping a big alliance from breaking across the middle of the board. So definitely look at those, not only for stopping a solo, but also for knowing where you can sort of survive on just a dot or two Sometimes you're 2-3 center power, that you will not have a great finish, but you just want to survive, and that's a good goal. I think you should always still try to fight for survival. And these places right at the stalemate line are best for that. I think especially Munich. People say Munich is the safest place on the diplomacy map. And I'm not just saying that because I'm German and I want to sort of like, I'm such a big fan of the German police or anything. I'm Northern Germany, so I can't prop up Munich actually. No, but it's a great place because often the two fronts meet there, and you're right in the middle, and lots of people will want to support you there because they cannot take it themselves, so they don't want the other side to have it. So I've seen many games where people have survived on one center in Munich, for example, or on two in Munich and Berlin or so. But offensively, there are very important positions as well. So, for example, when we're talking about a timed round and you're setting up your situation like we talked about earlier, you know that there's going to be stabbing in the end and you have to make a run for the board top, take a few centers somewhere. There are very key spots that you should be in order to attack. Serbia is one of them. If you are in the Balkan/Austrian region, Serbia is the key to that region. There are some sea spaces that are very important. The North Sea, for example, in the West is massively important. There's no single space on the map that has more centers bordering it. In the East, it would probably be something like the Aegean Sea or the Black Sea. And I think what is really important to keep in mind when you're playing in a timed round is that you should occupy these spaces before you enter the end game. And by the end game, in a timed round, I usually mean this phase of the game where people start completely changing how they play because they know that there is no long term anymore. Start stabbing or completely pulling back because they think they're not going to take anything anymore anyway, so they will just cover the bases. And that's usually, from my experience, only a short period of like 1 game year or maybe 2, but usually not much more than that. So it's really, there is no time for you to think about in this like penultimate year of the game, how do I get a unit into Serbia or how do I get the North Sea? Because then, it will take too much time. So start thinking about, if you want to make a play in the end, start thinking about these spaces 3, 4, 5 years before the game will end, and try to come up with arguments in your alliance you are in that you are allowed to occupy these spaces, even if you only want them to eventually stab your ally. If that's what you want to do, try to come up with an argument why it is good for your argument, for your alliance that you have an army in Serbia or you should take the North Sea. And don't think that you can take them in the third to last turn and then still massively benefit of that. Now, I think that is very important to keep in mind. And no, Nicola, you're not a bigger Care Bear than I am. No way.
Like, come on, what's important for you is to be where you're next to your allies dots, right? And thinking about stabbing. Interesting, Robert.
Well, it is something to consider. You don't always have to follow through, but if you want to do it properly.
All right, let me interrupt this conflict before it gets any more nasty. Katie, 2022 Summer Classic champ, give us your final thoughts on Endgames.
I think we've talked about a lot of things. I didn't have anything else that I wanted to bring up. I will say one thing that Robert made me think of when he said, go for important spaces early. If you're looking to solo, which don't take my advice, I don't really solo, so take someone else's advice. But one piece of advice that I have heard from people who are good at soloing is when you're looking at centers like Munich or Tunis or, maybe depending on what side of the board you're on, those end game centers, the ones that are usually the last, the 18th center, if you can find a way to get those before people think that you're a solo threat, that's huge. Because as soon as if you're France and you've got 11 centers in Tunis, nobody's going to work with you. But if you're France and you have 6 centers in Tunis, you might still have an ally in the north. So to do well in the end game, I guess you have to be prepared for the end game in that sense.
To do well at anything, you have to prepare for it. Would be my position.
That's fair.
All right, Nicola, 2022 Summer Classic chump, but 2021 VDL champ. What are your final thoughts about Endgames?
Choose find a strategy which makes it possible for you to win. Like, honestly, I wouldn't have played like that in an untimed game, or if you have 5 more years than in Summer Classic. I choose strategy because I thought that was my only way of winning. It didn't work out, so maybe don't listen to my advice. But like, I think you need to have a clear strategy of what will happen and how you get a chance to win. And that's for the end game, but also before that. And I think that's something maybe that frustrated Russ and I during the game. It was that Josh gave up. He didn't find this strategy which would allow him to win, and we didn't maybe convince him that he could. And if you don't have this strategy, you're just moving on the map and you're doing like short-term deals. You don't know where you're going. So find a strategy and try to make it happen. And if it doesn't happen, no regrets, but at least find the strategy and give you a chance. Give yourself a chance.
I like it. All right, finish us off. 2022 Boston Massacre champ, Robert Schupper.
So I would like to finish up with a learning I took from that tournament in Boston where I went to. And I was playing 2 boards with a longtime face-to-face player, Brian Acton. I'm pretty sure you will probably know him, David. And he has a very particular playing style, which includes that he likes to veto draws, even when he has no real opportunity of growing, just because he thinks it's the wrong result. He thinks the wrong people are on top, or it's like a boring game, not interesting enough. And we really played on for quite a long time in one of those games because it was time unlimited. And I think one thing that is really important to keep in mind in the end game, if you're playing time unlimited, is to think about how do I reach a state of stability? Not just how do I get to a particular amount of centers that I'm happy with, or how do I get in front, how am I the leader of the board, but how do I get the game to end right there? And there are a couple of ways how you can do that. You can take players off the board and they can't veto anymore. Like, you should usually take Nicolas Taillet off the board, because otherwise he will just stab you eventually. That's always a good place to start. But
why always me?
it's always you. It's got to be you. You're just too good. And but no, kidding aside, that's one way. Sometimes if you strike at the king, kill the king. If they will veto you the drawdown when you are on top because you've stabbed them. But there are other ways, it's often the popularity contest, just like make good relationships with everybody on the board, and so that nobody has a problem with you topping. That can work out very well. Or get into a tactical position where you can just, like, there's a lock and stalemate position, for example, and nobody can take anything off of you and can say, like, yeah, you can keep playing, but you will not take anything. It can be a mix of that, or just like one of them. Or just like, if you don't know what to do, just solo. That's also a state of stability when the game ends. But I guess that's an important learning. I I feel like in the 20th century, Germany rarely soloed. But anyway,
that's right.
Yeah, sure. I'm wondering why I was the only one who was not on that top board we were talking about earlier. Anyway, long story short, think about how to reach that state of stability if you're playing time unlimited, and not just make a push and then don't have an idea how to get the game to end before everybody will unite against you. So that will be what my takeaway from that.
All right, Robert, I appreciate that, and thank you to Nicolas, and thank you to Katie, and see y'all next time.
Thanks, David.
See you.
And thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. For our other broadcast offerings, just visit our website at diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.